Welcome to the Rotary Club of Edina and our joint meeting with the Edina Morningside Club as we continue our Rotary journey. I am Joe Hayes, your 2022-23 president. I would especially like to welcome all of our guests for this great presentation today, visiting Rotarians, senior actives. I hope you will enjoy the meeting. We have a meeting team. Oh, by the way, you missed a great sit-down music. This is the first time I've had it since I've been president that people have actually all been sitting down. So I've have some music queued up to get you guys to sit down, and it was Sly and the Family Stone, everyday people. So front desk, thank you, Don Hutchinson, Greeter Sylvester, and Greeter Lindsay Smaka, Invocation, me. DEI announcement, Sylvester. Moderator introduction, Joe Hayes. Me. Thank you to the speaker, Josh Spray, and photographer, Rich Kleber. We had our gala on Saturday night, and oh, was that fun. We had such a great time. We appreciate everyone joining us and all the dancing. Our Factor was fantastic. And it was, we especially want to thank our gala sponsors. Diamond Level, Dr. Dash, Ruby Level, $5,000. Key Cadillac, Washburn McCreevy, Faribault Willow-Mills, Carl and Heather Hansen, Jennings Family Foundation, Edina Liquor, John and Becky Allen. Especially like to go back to Edina Liquor, which got bumped. They were especially generous with Ruby sponsorship, but they also lined up all of the wine at a value cost and really helped offset a lot of our costs. So a big round of applause for Edina Liquor. And delivery. John and Becky Allen. Our Emerald, American Family, Styles Financial, Cahill Financial, McNillis and Asado Financial, Transition in Business, Trust Point, Jack Kennefit, Scoopy Poo, back, 1500 Sapphire Level, Grandview Auto, William and Lois Klein's Foundation, Joe and Chris Hayes, Matt Bookmeyer, Mike and Susan Martini. 1000 Pearl, we have Traditions Capital, Christensen Group, which is Will Stanky, Katie and Ralph Campbell, Terry and Mary Lee Stevens, Dick and Evie Teagan, Bob and Rosie Gudrud, Matt Bennis, Mike Eckert. Also in our 750 Pearl, we have Rev, we have Walker Group, Bjorn, can never pronounce your name, sorry. John Flynn, Catherine and Tom Gump, Mike Hagan, Renee Harberts and Dave Wendt, Gordy Lewis. We have Callis Law. We have Dan and Stacy Mott, Steve and Nancy Slice, Bob and Vivian Stellick, Bob and Rhoda Perkins, and we have Advent. We have Woosh, Christensen and Lowy, and Pets Are In. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your sponsorship. It really is what the thing that really drives this. Especially like to thank Kayla and Julie, our co-chairs, who did a fantastic job. They really brought a lot of life with their GNN News, which was Gala Network News, which was an awful lot of fun and very creative. And really appreciate their efforts, creativity, and they're just a blast to work with. So it was a wonderful evening. Also especially like to thank Becky Mikowski for all of her efforts and lining up, making sure all the ducks were in a row in many different ways and bills were paid, which is an important part. So the gala is the key component to this. I will also be dropping a note to all of you this afternoon. For those of you who weren't able to make it to the gala, we're going to make one final ask if you can donate, and also an opportunity to be a part of Susan Stiles' backyard party featuring Paul Peterson on music. Yeah, are you? Oh, you're in. You're in, baby. Also like to bring you up on membership. bring you up on membership, which is a livelihood of our club. And I would like to officially welcome 3 new members, Julian Cords, Chief Todd Milburn, Vinita Steffel, which brings us to 162 members. That's +6 for the year. That is a great job, Erica. And we have 3 to 5 more people in the pipeline, which is fantastic. Please stand for the invocation. As we gather here for a greater understanding of our organization, selves, and how we can improve our lives, community, and organization through diversity, equity, and inclusion, let us think of the lesson of Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet, which was a team of rivals. Although the diversity and ethnicity was not a part of his team of rivals, the effort to surround himself and organization with smart people, diverse thought and background, and encourage them to challenge and ideas brought us through our darkest years to our country, to the end of slavery, and to be one union. One of our country's greatest achievements. We must all come with an open heart, ears, and without judgment. It's a tall task. Bow our heads. Let us give thanks for our blessings of this food we eat, the friendship in the room, the good people in the organizations to facilitate charity on this beautiful day in the greatest country in the world. Amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Of the things we think, say, and do, is it fair to all concerned, will goodwill and better friendships will be beneficial to all concerned. Thank you, Doug Johnson.
I probably don't need the mic, but I'm going to use it anyways. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests. I would like to take a few minutes to update you on the journey of the Rotary Club of Edina's DEI Committee. Several months ago, after the George Floyd's murder, I was asked by Josh Sprague, at the time current president of our club, to chair the Race and Equity Committee, which would report directly to the membership committee. At that time, I asked Josh, who would he recommend to co-chair this newly formed committee with me? And he recommended Jennifer Benarat. In August of 2020, I asked Jennifer to co-chair the Race and Equity Committee, and she said yes, and thank God she did. Next, I'd like to share with you the evolution of the Race and Equity Committee. We scheduled our first committee meeting on September 30th, 2020, and at that meeting, we had 3 goals for the committee. Initially, we wanted to impact membership, programs, and suggestions for weekly speakers. We quickly worked with the speaker committee chair to recommend more people of color to speak at our weekly club meetings, and we experienced much success with that goal. We were asked by the chair of the Edina Rotary Club Foundation to assist them in recommending nonprofits for local grants, and we also made outreach calls to those nonprofits to help encourage them to apply for the local grants. Third, we partnered with the Lake Street Project to adopt a local business that was impacted by the civil unrest on Lake Street, and that business was Post Plus. And fourth, Josh Sprague and our committee also promoted the Black Business Mixer held at Pimento's Jamaican Cafe, owned by Tommy Beavis. Woo, go Tommy. We schedule monthly networking meetings on the fourth Thursday of every month. Josh also organized 2 progressive dinner nights where our club joined members from the Northside Club and broke bread at several Black-owned businesses located in Minneapolis. And lastly, and brings us to today. Our committee promoted a series of meetings partnering with the Fed Reserve Bank of Minnesota, focusing on race and equity. As you have heard, our committee has been very proactive, as many of the other committees within the Rotary Club of Edina. Last spring, our board voted to add an additional board committee and change our committee name to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And in June 2022, the club members voted to approve the change, and I was officially named as the DEI chair. I've shared this timeline with you today to thank all of you, and especially my committee, and I truly call them my friends, for all their support these past 2 years. Thank you for your time.
As we all have learned, between Jennifer and Josh, you could also say also a lot of times. They also do this, they also do that. So everyone get involved, be as involved as Josh and Jennifer. It's a great way to meet a lot of people and have fun. So my intro to the speaker, handsome picture. Arlene Chermoff, one more time, Chermoff is Senior Vice President of Community Development, which leads the bank engagement with communities throughout the 9th District to promote economic opportunities for low and moderate income people and those living in Indian countries. Key focus areas of our early childhood development and affordable housing. Prior to joining the bank in 2018, Arlene served as chair for Minnesota Met Council, where she built a strong partnership with local governments. Arlene holds a bachelor's degree in business administration with George Washington University School of Business, and was a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. Arlene was named 2020 Women in Business honoree by the Minneapolis and St. Paul Business Journal, and is member of the Minnesota State Attorney General's Task Force dedicated to improving women's economic security. She also lives in St. Paul. She is the mother of 2 boys. She eats her dessert first. And welcome, Arlene.
Thank you for that warm introduction. And also, I want to say thank you to Edina Rotary and Morningside for having us back for this round 2 conversation. I was here in June where we had the opportunity to talk a little bit about our work on, I can push it down, okay, thank you, that's better. To talk a little bit about our work on racial equity and the impacts, and really talking about a series that we hosted along with our reserve banks from across the United States on the role of structural racism and the economy. And so we had the opportunity in June to talk a little bit about housing, finance, and workforce, and really came to recognize that this particular audience here with the Rotarians, a lot of you are in the private sector, and there's really an opportunity when you think about specific actions that you might individually take, that there is an opportunity to really think about workforce and think about the role that diversity, equity, and inclusion play in each of our workforces, either as colleagues or as leaders of those organizations. And so what we wanted to do today was really kind of do a deep dive in that conversation. But I do really also want to make sure that we recognize the fact that this is now, and listening to Sylvester's presentation on all of the progress that you've made as an organization and the level of commitment and enthusiasm you have for this topic, it means something. I think it's a really big deal, and I just want to recognize that and say thank you again for having us back to have this conversation with you. I am also really excited to introduce our 2 fireside chat co-panelists, Tiffany Daniels and Ron Feldman. I was sitting next to Tiffany and just kind of listening to her explanation about who she is. And I have a bio for her. She's the managing director of the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity, where she's responsible for building the organization's strategy, structure, and operational plans to address racial disparities in Minnesota. We'll talk a little bit more about what all that means when we get into the panel. But the way she described herself and her background, she said she's all about building brand and running business. So she's had a breadth of experience in the private sector, coming most recently from General Mills, about building brand. And she's worked on products and led growth for brands that we all know and love, Wheaties, Larabar, Fiber One, and more. And so beyond her official roles, she's always been an advocate for underrepresented groups, including her work as Chief Operating Officer for a nonprofit focused on Black and Latinx undergraduate students, and leading program development for General Mills Black employees. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Missouri and a master's degree from the University of Michigan. So welcome, Tiffany. Do you want to come join us up here? I also have the pleasure of introducing my boss, Ron Feldman. He's the first Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, where he leads bank operations, including finance, budgeting, strategic planning, workforce and talent development, and making sure that we achieve and measure our strategic objectives. Since joining the bank in 1995, Ron has served in a number of senior officer roles, from supervision and regulation and credit. He's run the Financial Services Support Office. He knows pretty much anything you ever need to know about the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, as well as the Federal Reserve System, so he's a wealth of knowledge around that. He's got a bachelor's from the University of Wisconsin and a master's degree from the Maxwell School of Syracuse University, where he was a university fellow. He's also a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. I feel like I could go on reading his bio, but I'm gonna stop there. He has been, and so let me welcome him. So I'm gonna join you guys over there, I think. I'm gonna give you this microphone. And I think I can do this, okay, great. So, one of the things, Tiffany, I'm going to start with you. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with a round of questions that I will moderate, and then we have note cards and pens on your table. So if you do have questions that you want to ask the speakers, Josh has agreed to be the runner. He'll pick up the cards from your table, and we'll probably take the second half of this conversation to take questions from the audience. So with that, Tiffany, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is the Minnesota Business Partnership on Racial Equity? What does that mean, and why would that be important to this particular audience?
Yes. Well, thank you. First, thank you, Lee, for the question, and I want to thank you all for having me. I want to shout out Sylvester and the wonderful work that you're leading as chair of your DEI committee. So often, it requires courageous leadership in the work of racial equity. It takes someone willing to have the first meeting, pull the first group together, and so I thank you for blazing that trail for this particular group. I am the managing director for the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. We are a coalition of businesses, about 50 large companies and organizations here in the state, most of them large employers, that have come together to collectively deploy their resources and expertise to advance racial equity for the sake of Black Minnesotans. Our vision is to build a more just and prosperous state with and for Black Minnesotans. The work that we do every day is centered around driving positive economic outcomes for Black Minnesotans. Our work is to eliminate the systemic barriers that stand in the way between Black Minnesotans achieving the same economic outcomes as white Minnesotans. And there are a few focus areas where the business community is uniquely positioned to play a role in this conversation around racial equity. The first is around employment opportunity. The 50 members of MBCRE are some of the largest employers in the state, and so it is paramount that those businesses collectively have a perspective and a point of view on how to drive representation in their organizations. The second area is around Black business development. How might we support a thriving ecosystem of Black entrepreneurs as a pathway to wealth building? Entrepreneurship is one of the most important ways to driving wealth in the community, and so it's important that we support a thriving ecosystem of Black entrepreneurs, but also think about how we might build a procurement pipeline into our member companies as they are some of the largest procurers in the state. And then lastly, our work is focused on advancing just practices in housing, safety, and policing so that we can contribute to building safe and thriving communities for all Minnesotans, but especially for Black Minnesotans to live and work.
Great, well, thank you for that introduction, and I think that's super helpful. You know, one of the things that I've been really curious about, just from a business standpoint, you talked about the kind of 50 large members that are big companies within the Twin Cities. What's their motivation when they say, what's their why for joining MBCRE?
I mean, their why, I'd say, has evolved over time, and rightfully so. If you look back to where this community was, 2.5 years ago, it was clear that we needed to do some things differently. We were a community that was in deep mourning, in pain, and the disparities that were exposed, while not unique to Minnesota, reflected certainly a larger conversation around the position of Black people in this country and how that position has grown or not grown over time. And I'd say that the motivator for members to come to the coalition 2 years ago was mostly around an urgency to act, with a lack of clarity about what that action should or could look like. But they were answering a call that said, I've got to do something. I got to use the power that I've amassed. I need to share the power that I've amassed as a business, as an organization, as a CEO, as a leader. I got to do something more impactful for my community. And we are better able to do that at scale if I'm doing that alongside other large companies. And so that, I say, was what attracted members to MBCRE 2 years ago. Now that we are all, I say, a little bit past that fierce urgency, we're settling in, the business community or the business environment has evolved, right? We're talking about levels of inflation that are higher than some of us have seen. We're talking about supply chain complexities. So there are a lot of other pressing business issues that have entered the conversation that weren't necessarily top of mind a couple years ago. And now I'd say what brings a member to MBCRE is wanting to have a place for sustainable action. I understand that as a business, I might need to engage in this conversation about racial equity, but what are the things that I should be building into my practices? How might I change how I show up, or how my government relations representatives show up at the Capitol? Like, what are the things that we can ingrain into how our companies operate? And how might I figure that out with peer organizations? So I say those are the couple things that have drawn our members and keep them sustained and engaged in this work.
Thank you for that. So one of the things that I neglected to mention when I was doing Ron's introduction was that he has been a leader not only within the Minneapolis Fed, but also within the Federal Reserve System on our work on making our workforce reflect the communities that we serve. And so Ron, I just want to start with a question for you. Why did this become a priority, and kind of what's the Fed's why and why we engage?
Sure. So let me start, Aline started by saying I'm her boss. So I do want to sort of start by saying, Aline asked me whether I'd be willing to participate here, and I really appreciate the Edina Rotary, Morningside Rotary, to have this event. But I was like, oh, you can get someone better than me. So I don't want people to think that the reason I'm here was sort of like Aline had no choice because I sort of forced her to do it. Although this is going to work well on her performance review, so she's there's no doubt that Aline is a smart man. She manages up, very, very well. I was reflecting a little bit, because Aline, I knew you were going to ask me that question about it, and I was thinking about a conversation I had maybe 15 years ago at the Fed. So we've got, in addition to monetary policy, and I'm glad Tiffany brought up inflation, because we don't really hear about that at all, other than those comments. So we're a 1,100 person organization, and so the chief operating officer's role is to run the operations. We do, if you have cash in your wallet, we're the ones who sort of give it to the banks. If you bought a savings bond, which a lot of people have done recently because they're indexed to inflation, we've got the call center for that, et cetera. So we do a lot of stuff that people don't know about. So many years ago, 15 years ago, I was talking to an employee about sort of a hiring decision they made. And I said, well, I had to approve it, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about what the pool looked like. And they said, well, it's actually interesting. There was somebody from, I don't remember now the details, but like, let's say an Ivy League school, and they seemed really qualified, but I'd like to go with this other person instead because I was a little worried that the person was overqualified and wouldn't stay here very long. And as a manager, I don't want to have people always turning over. I remember this part very distinctly. We need to have a fair number of people who are steady eddies in our group. Because otherwise, if we have just a bunch of overachievers, we're going to have a lot of turnover as they go to get, future better jobs. So I thought, wow, okay, we've got a problem. We've got a really big problem in the organization if this is at all typical of what's going on here with the 1,100 people we have. So what was the person saying? I don't want to have a very big pool of people. I want a narrow range of people. I want someone who's going to stay, who's kind of average. And I've got enough statistical background to know, most of us are kind of average, right? That's just kind of how it works out. But boy, every once in a while, I think we should sort of strive for more than average. So anyway, Aline, I'm going to answer your question in a second. What's the point of this story, right? Why are we interested in diversity, equity, inclusion? So my experience to date has been, and just want to riff off a little bit of what Tiffany said, how do we make any of these things sustainable? While there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, sort of justice reasons why the people in business and people hiring need to sort of hire a wide range of people. And while there's even a sort of growing movement to point to the fact that inclusive teams perform better. So if you've got a diverse team, they actually make better decisions, firms are more profitable. You don't need those things to want to do it. What I mean is, by improving our hiring practices, by telling people, no, actually, we don't want you to hire a bunch of steady eddies, which in my experience tend to be people that look like you, right? You're hiring somebody who's going to stay, who's kind of fine, who's nothing special. If you say to yourself, I actually want to hire the best people. I want to hire someone who's going to be amazing. I don't care if they say 6 months, 9 months. They're going to turn this place around because they're going to bring a tremendous energy or whatever it is they're going to bring. That's the people I want to hire. We have found that by working around the discussion of diversity, equity, inclusion, we've actually been able to improve our hiring overall. That's what our focus is. So what's the why? The why is we need better hiring practices, we need better practices for retaining people across the board, and we can get into more details, but the punchline is by focusing on hiring, by focusing on retaining, by focusing on all the things you need to do if you want to do okay in this space, you actually end up doing much better across all of the spaces. Not just more inclusive teams, you just hire better people, you retain better people. That's the why. We're going to be more effective in delivering cash, in answering calls, in doing monetary policy if we do a better job of attracting a wider range of folks, because our practices are going to lead us to people who are the most qualified, who we want to keep.
Okay, so I think there was a lot there, but I'm starting to hear a couple of themes, and at least in the first couple of responses on sustainability and on practice. And so I kind of want to dive a little bit into that, especially on practice in terms of hiring. Like, how do you actually hire better people? I find that often in these cases when we're talking about, do we want to have a more inclusive environment? Do we want to have a more inclusive workforce? There are like a whole bunch of little individual decisions that get made. How do you influence those decisions? Is that a conversation that you guys are having? Tiffany, can you talk a little bit more about that? Just thinking about how do you attract and get more diverse talent in the door?
Mm-hmm. So what I'll say is I come to this work from a number of different vantage points. First, I am a Black woman navigating corporate America and did that in a number of large global enterprises. Most recently, while I was at General Mills, I was a leader in our diversity recruiting space, helping to coach leaders on how to build an inclusive environment, oftentimes calling them out when the environment and the culture was not inclusive, and then now as the managing director for the coalition, thinking about how we scale some of those efforts across multiple employers. So what I'll say is, and I want to create one distinction, is that there is the conversation around hiring and diversity, and then there is a separate conversation around inclusion. So first, the hiring, the getting a diverse workforce, right? It's just getting people in the door. And there are a number of practices or policies that decision makers should think about. I think about or kind of put that responsibility primarily on the business leaders, the line leaders, right? If you are running a business, it's your responsibility that the team reflects either the consumers you serve, the customers you're trying to reach, or that you are evolving your hiring practices just to be better as a business. And that is the responsibility of every single business leader. In terms of the how you put that into practice, there are ways to evolve your college and university recruiting strategy. A lot of you may work in organizations that have partnerships with universities and colleges, and you go to the same colleges and universities over time to get the talent. They're long-standing relationships usually. I've gotten most of my jobs because I went to a university that had a long-standing relationship with an organization. Over time, though, you're going to that pool, you're going back to the same pool. That pool will look less and less diverse over time. So if you want to be intentional and purposefully attract different talent, you have to look different places. In the last couple years, the number of partnerships that organizations in the private sector have developed with historically Black colleges and universities, or professional organizations like the National Society of Black Engineers or National Association of Black Accountants. There are a number of places to go to help diversify your hiring pool. And so that is counsel that I've given both as a business leader and as we think about ways to drive representation across our member organizations. The second piece of this is inclusion. So, all right, we've done the hiring piece. You've changed your hiring strategies. You have attracted candidates that may look different than your typical candidate pool. You have to ensure that those candidates are coming into an environment that is welcoming and inclusive. And that is work that has to happen every day, all day. No days off, y'all. This is no days off, okay? And so often, the experience of an employee is heavily influenced by the experience or the relationship that they have with their direct manager or their manager's manager, right? Aline might say that her experience at the Fed is directly related to the experience or relationship she has with Ron. And we all know that. You've worked in places and you're dealing a lot of times mostly with your manager or your manager's manager. And so ensuring that we are skilling up those leaders that have people management responsibility. Some organizations have rolled out, DEI training or allyship training, and it is a requirement for our leaders of people to take them. So those are some of the tangible ways that I've seen some businesses start to think differently about both their hiring and then be thoughtful about the environment that those employees are coming into, because we want to be able to retain them over time.
That's really interesting. So Ron, I want you to comment really quickly on just specific practices in hiring and what specifically we may have changed. And then I want to move on to inclusion. So I have another follow-up question after that.
Sure. So I think the first thing that we changed was who gets to approve hiring. Now, again, so we're 1,100 people. If you're doing a General Mills, the scale, the scope, Cargill's a different thing, but I think the lesson sort of applies as well. So we've got 65 folks who are considered officers of our organization. The president and I interview those people. We hire them. So we get recommendations from the business lines, but we interview all of the leading candidates, and we allocate the time that's necessary to do that. We've told our senior folks, and Patience Ferguson, raise your hand if you don't mind. She's our new head of HR, so she's one of our new senior leaders. Alina is one of our senior leaders. They are accountable for all the hiring in their area. I don't mean the direct reports. They are accountable for all the hiring. Now, they don't have to be involved in the hiring of the interns or the business analyst too, or whatever it is. But they're accountable anyway. So they have to decide if they're going to delegate, what are they going to do? What did that change? Well, it changed the conversation completely, because the kinds of questions that I ask about who are we bringing forward are about what's the potential for this person to grow in the organization? How different are they than the current people are here? What is their leadership experience? Those are the kinds of questions I ask. My point isn't that I'm some genius, but those are the kinds of questions I ask. What are the questions that line folks ask? Can you start immediately? Have you already done this exact job? People don't ask that question, but that's what they're getting at. There's nothing wrong with them. We're holding them accountable to the performance measures that they've been assigned, that they've come up with. And they know that if they bring someone in who takes 3 months to come up to speed, they're going to be off their metrics, and that we're going to ask them questions about it. So what we need to do is a combination of reassure them, hey, we get it. But if you bring somebody in and we have to sacrifice 3 months of productivity to have somebody who's going to be the next Patience and the next Aline, that's an amazing trade-off for us, as an organization. For that individual at the line, that person's moved on. They don't get any credit for that. They don't get credit for, oh, I brought this great person in. So my point isn't that our line folks are doing anything wrong. My point is the incentives of different people in the organization are different. And if you want to that was my original point, just as an example about changing hiring overall, it's not that we suddenly have hiring just better black individuals or Hispanic. We're hiring better people. And in doing so, but because we're asking different questions, we now are also hiring different kinds of people. I hope that makes sense. That's sort of a shorthand, but I think that's just a very tangible. One other thing real quick, we've also told people, if you need to wait a little bit longer, we understand that. You don't have to fill this thing in the next 5 days. Now, in the current environment, sometimes you do have to fill things in the next 5 days or else you're not going to get anyone. But for most of our lives, we're not going to have a labor market like we have right this second. And that's the other thing that sort of relieved pressure. People's incentives, particularly the further down you go in the organization, their incentives are to fill the jobs as quickly as they possibly can because they don't want to lose productivity, they don't want to fall behind, and frankly, they're the ones, as the manager, who are almost always going to have to pick up if there's an open spot. They're the ones who are going to have to pitch in the most. We've told them, if it takes a little longer to fill it, that's okay, but we want you looking at a bigger pool during that time. And I think those two things, from what we've seen, have been absolutely the biggest game changers in terms of on-the-ground change.
That's super helpful. Tiffany, jump in. Go ahead.
What I love about what you're describing, Ron, is that the Fed's commitment to DEI shows up in your talent strategy and practices. So it's not that you are doing something kind of on the side. And usually, I think when we talk about DEI work, it's kind of it's the bolt-on. It's I have a core business or I have a core talent strategy, and then I want to tack on my diversity hiring inclusion strategy, insert whatever. If your organization is committed and is serious about transforming your workforce or transforming what your how inclusive your environment is, that priority must show up and must be a part of your everyday decision making in the organization. And I think that is when we start to see true transformation, when our equitable practices become the main and core practices and behavior in an organization.
Yeah. Aline, can I tell one other quick story? Do you mind?
Yeah, it makes my job really easy. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, because I want to do a vendor spend thing real quick. Again, we had a conversation. We were going to look at renewing our contract for our sort of main person that takes care of our facilities. We're not a huge vendor spend organization. But we've got some, and we wanted to be intentional about that too. So get the recommendation. It's the same firm that we've used for 25 years, as long as we've had this building that we have downtown. By the way, if you want to take a tour, we're back open, so if you're interested, let us know. Okay, so have a conversation. Hey, we'd like to renew up with the same folks for 5 years. Great, why is that? Well, they're the only ones who know the building. They know the building, and so it's a lot cheaper for them when we do things so they can underbid folks. Are you a little worried that we've used the same person for 25 years? I mean, do you normally just sort of double down and only have one sort of sole source contract? Is that the kind of thing that you want to do? A little bit of silence, and so have we again, my point of these stories is not sort of like, oh my God, Ron Feldman is a genius. Ron Feldman asked the most obvious questions. The questions that all of you ask. I can't believe that all of you don't ask the same kinds of questions, right? Particularly now in retrospect, it looks good that you don't want to be doubled down on one person because we know that, boy, you want to diversify your supply chains. Anyway, so the conversation then went into, okay, well, maybe we should have another person in addition to these folks, and we do want to bring in a different folks, et cetera. Now we've got more diverse spending going on. And the best part of the story, and I'll conclude, turn it back to Tiffany or Arlene, I'm not involved in any of those conversations anymore because the folks in the facilities group have come back and they said, do you know something? It was really beneficial because now we got somebody in who's new and they haven't looked at it before. So the stuff that we used to hear about how everything was fine, actually the, whatever, I never quite understand, the power jacks, this thing, don't touch it, you'll get electrocuted, whatever it is, they have a new way of doing that's better than the other folks. I guess my point is, it's the basic questions that people ask in the rest of their life, except all of a sudden, if you phrase it as, well, we want to get more diverse spend, there's a lot of pushback. Boy, we're really going to sacrifice quality. If you say, do we really want to be with the same person? I'm going to ask you a business question that you always ask me. The answer is different.
So I'm coming up with I'm picking the theme here of really integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into our business strategies. And you talked a little bit about incentives and changing incentives and really looking at what level you want to have different decisions made at. Can we talk, I want to kind of switch over because Tiffany started to raise the question of, okay, you've now hired the people, but how do you actually have a more inclusive environment? How do you make sure you're fostering that same kind of inclusive environment once people are actually in the door? And so can you maybe both of you comment on effective strategies that you've heard that also align really integrating incentives, but also with our business strategies on how do you create a more inclusive environment? I'll just ask that more generally. And then Ron, as a white male leader in an organization, can you talk more specifically about your role in that? But so I'll open it up. Tiffany, you go first.
Okay, sorry. And can you repeat the question?
No, how do you actually create an inclusive environment? Like
Okay.
what are specific strategies that you're seeing organizations are doing that you think are promising that you feel like would be beneficial
Got it.
for others?
The first thing I'll say is it starts from the moment you have extended an offer to a potential candidate. So you have to start thinking about the experience before they've even said yes to the offer that you've extended and then carry that through. I'll reflect on my experience at General Mills as a diverse candidate. I was extended an offer, and part of the wooing, you are the most attractive, right, when you have not accepted the offer. And so part of the wooing process was for me to spend time with every single Black leader that was VP level and above at the company. I had an opportunity to talk to them about their experiences, talk to them about what had kept them at the company for 25, 30 years, really understand what it was like. But that was an investment. The organization understood, General Mills understood, that in order for Tiffany to say yes, she's gonna have to feel like she can be comfortable here. And the best people to carry that message is not the HR recruiter, it's the people that live it every day. So engage existing employees in the recruiting process. They can be your strongest brand ambassadors, your strongest advocates, because they say yes and show up to work for your organization every single day. So it's, leaders. There's also communities of support that can exist inside organizations. So some organizations have launched affinity groups or employee resource groups to support individuals that identify with one another. Those can be a wonderful place to help ease whatever apprehensions a potential candidate has. So that conversation certainly starts before they said yes, and then you pick it right back up once they've started. So thinking about, from day one, are there mentors or leaders in the organization that you can partner people of difference with, right? It is, I think, responsible to recognize that if someone is a person of color in an organization, that your organization likely was not designed with them in mind. The culture, the practices, the norms, it is not designed for them to be successful. And it is likely in a language that they probably don't understand. So they need people to help them decode, help navigate, and it is most comfortable coming from someone that may look like them, or that may come from the same school as them, or the same part of the country, or grew up in a similar area as them, right? There are a number of points of similarities to create or to identify to help folks really ease into the transition and starting in an organization.
Thank you for that. So Ron, can you answer the same question, but then also I want to have an understanding of your own perspective as a white male leader in creating an inclusive environment?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say, despite the fact that most of my answers have been very definitive here, I'm completely open. There's a lot of people in this room, people who I think take the four-way test seriously. If I look at that about how to be inclusive, there's a lot in those. People who don't know it. Well, once they know it, then they will take it seriously. I mean, so if you look at those questions, I think there's a lot there about how people want to be treated and being inclusive. Anyway, that's just sort of an intro that if you've got ideas, and Tiffany's had a bunch, totally want to hear what they are. Because I feel like this is a really tough area. I think the first thing I would start with is it's really hard to be inclusive if you're not diverse. I mean, I just think you're starting off on the first step is you're bringing people in the organization who look around and don't see anybody who looks like them. I mean, that just, whether you've actually experienced that or not, I think you could at least conceptualize about how challenging that makes everything else for that individual. So I think the more diverse the organization is, the more chance you have of being inclusive. And then in terms of specific things, I mean, I think one thing I'll just highlight one thing. People's experience, we all know this, is often determined by their immediate boss, right? And that's the part that is really where people are going to need to work, is making sure that the people that you promote, we call them supervisors in our organization, they're their frontline managers. They've got to be people who listen, and they've got to be people who hear in a way that maybe they didn't come into that job with that skill. Because oftentimes they're getting promoted because they know how to do a specific set of tasks as opposed to know how to listen, be responsive, and do all the stuff that Tiffany said. And then finally, the point of sort of the fact that I'm on this panel, I'm a white male. I mean, I don't run away from that at all. I mean, I look out in most organizations, and most organizations, despite all the hewing and hawing people have about where the world's going in their view, most people look like me. And so, I don't think I'm not particularly worried about my place in the world. I don't think I have a lot to worry about. I'm feeling pretty secure, just given where I've started. And so for me, it just comes down to the things we've talked about. I mean, I want the Federal Reserve Bank to be the most amazing place to work, to carrying out the mission that we think is critical for having an economy that works for everybody. I mean, that's what we've been charged to do. And I just don't see a way of doing that without taking what we've been talking about today seriously, because it's just not going to happen. So that's how I approach it.
Thank you. So I'm going to, in a second, take questions from the audience. Oh, so before Tiffany responds, just start thinking about your questions, write them down. Josh is going to come grab them. But go ahead, Tiffany, jump in.
One of the things that I just wanted to respond to Ron's comments, and it may be a slightly different perspective on the relationship between diversity and inclusion. I think you should absolutely be focused on building an inclusive environment, no matter how diverse it is, right? If you think about it like your house, if your house is welcoming, right, you want your house to be warm, your house is warm all the time. It's not like you flip around your house when you're ready for company to come. Your house is your house, right? And so you want to be focused on how welcoming or inviting is this space so that I can meet people where they are, regardless of what they look like. And I think so often it seems like diversity is the precursor. Well, I don't have to worry about if people feel welcome here unless they're people of difference. Even if you don't have any black people or any other, people of color in your organization, there are people of difference there, right? They may look like you, but there are people with different experiences that come from different communities, that come with a different point of view. And it's imperative that the organization is meeting them where they are. So that's the first thing I say. And then on the topic of allyship, so the question that Aline asked to Ron about, kind of as a white man, what is his, what does he think is his responsibility? And I'll say that is, takes me to the concept of allyship. And when I think about the responsibility of allies to show up in the workplace, it is about showing up and advocating for others. My friends and I have this saying, and we call it, "Are you wearing someone else's jersey?" When you are a leader and you have ascended to a certain level in an organization, that comes with either power or proximity to power. And once you're there, your positionality should be about how am I advocating for others to get where I am, right? You've reached the pinnacle or close to it. And so the mark, I think, one of the marks of true leaders is of all the power you collected, how much are you giving away? And so if you are in a room and you are a part of a talent decision, right? Think about, are you saying someone else's name? Whose jersey are you wearing? Who are you there to represent? And oftentimes it can be, someone that is a person of color, but it may not be. But you should be advocating for someone else. And I think those are some of the practices that help build an inclusive and supportive environment for people of difference, no matter what they look like.
Thank you for that. And I kind of want to build a little bit on the allyship and just get into more specific examples or questions. And Ron, this is for you. Can you talk a little bit about maybe an experience or share a way that, sometimes you show up as an ally?
Well, should I ask you that?
No.
Okay.
I have lots of examples. I mean, the reason why I asked Ron to be on this panel is because he's a
I didn't.
leader.
Okay, but now it makes it look like. See the very first conversation. No, I appreciate that, Ellie. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I'll pick the most extreme. First of all, I love what Tiffany said, sort of adding to or correcting what I said. I thought that was great, better than what I said. Maybe the most extreme examples are when you sort of are in a position where, let's say you're meeting with some entity or group. We don't really do sales, but there are times when we're trying to be persuasive and we need a third party to be with us on something, but you see them, this third party or someone, even in your own organization who just is behaving in a way that is not even demeaning, but sort of, not allowing everybody in the room to participate, not sort of taking everyone's views seriously. And you've got to make that decision about what you're going to do about that. Are you going to do something about it or not? How are you going to do something about it or not? And I think sometimes there are non-confrontational ways to get where you need to go. Sometimes there's confrontational ways. And I think that's oftentimes where it's easy to say you're an ally when nothing's at stake. When you're really an ally when if you say something, it's going to make it harder for you to achieve why you're there in the first place. And I hope I've been able to, both in the room and after the room, and even decide, hey, something, we're just going to go separate ways because this is just a bad fit. Anyway, I'm highlighting that that's not the normal case, and so maybe it's not the most useful. But when there's no trade-off, there's a lot of easy decisions. When there's a trade-off, that's when it really matters what you're going to do.
So there are a ton of questions here that thank you for that I'm really excited about asking all of you guys. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to all of them. But one of the things so we've talked about hiring, we've talked about creating inclusive environments. Is that really, is the inclusive environment the key to retention ultimately for employees? Are there other specific strategies that once you have the employees in the door, there's obviously an inclusive place, but are there specific strategies that we need to be thinking about to retain employees of color or retain that diversity in our workforce?
Sure. Short answer is yes, there are specific strategies that we should be thinking about. And recognizing that the act of retention is happening outside of your company and it's happening inside of your company. I was reading a study from Greater MSP recently, and they survey folks that are interested in relocating from this region, and it discovered that Black people here in Minnesota are almost 50% more likely than other groups to plan to leave the region in the next 3 to 5 years, which was astounding. I knew anecdotally that it might be a little higher, but to see the number quantified made my mouth drop open. And when we think about retention, there is a responsibility that we have to prepare the place, that thinking about the infrastructure of the region, how welcoming the community is, right? If I have a Black Lives Matter sign on my lawn, is someone going to ask me to remove it, right? How do we think about preparing the place? How are we investing in the infrastructure? How are we supporting communities to close some of these disparity gaps that we all experience? That is work that is important and has a relationship to how well or not you're able to retain employees in your organization. The second thing I'll say is, yes, inside your company, you certainly have a responsibility to do that, and retention is certainly an action word. I like to tell my husband, love is an action word. Retention is an action word, okay? And it's important that you understand, especially for talent that is critical to retain, the talent that is kind of paramount to your pipeline, what their motivations are, ensuring that those employees feel supported. One of the things that I've been fortunate to participate in is a sponsorship program. General Mills has piloted a sponsorship program. I am assigned a sponsor, someone that is very senior in the organization. We're talking either on the CEO's team or one level below that. And that person's primary responsibility is to understand where I want to go next, help me navigate and break down roadblocks in the organization to get there. That's all that they do. And we talk about wearing my jersey. His role is to wear my jersey in the room that I'm not in. So that's one example of how you can help retain. Another thing that I've seen organizations do is stay interviews. And it is a conversation with employees just about where they are, right? Are you a flight risk? You think about quitting? Why are you thinking about quitting? You want to stay? What would make you stay? Having a very honest conversation, but also being thoughtful about who's conducting those interviews. If an employee has a tense relationship with their manager, they're probably not the person to have that conversation, right? Or has a tense relationship with their vice president, it's probably not the right place. So you want to ensure that if you are using stay interviews as a tactic for retention, that you're setting them up in a way that is designed to glean the highest quality insight as possible from employees.
So you had a really specific definition of a sponsor in that answer. Can you talk a little bit about what's the difference between a sponsor and a mentor? And I'm going to ask you that same thing in a second, Ron.
Oh, yes. Because they're very different. And I think of mentors as folks that can help advise on your day-to-day. They see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if I am a mentee, I'm comfortable being vulnerable with that mentor, and they are helping me navigate the day-to-day challenges. They're probably a little more junior in the organization, but still have enough experience and insight that can be advantageous to help me navigate it on a day-to-day. So as I think about, let's say if I'm at a manager level, it may be someone that's at a director level. If I'm an associate or a senior associate, it may be a manager that's been with the organization for 7 to 10 years, something like that. A sponsor is someone that is very senior in the organization. As I said, my sponsor is either C-suite or one level below. And so they bring an aerial view of the organization. They're in the rooms that I'm not in listening to the conversations about me that I am not privy to, because those conversations about talent, we all know, happen in organizations. And so that person's primary responsibility is to understand my good, my best. They're not in the room to talk about Tiffany's development areas. They're in the room to say, Tiffany is ready for that promotion. And I know she's ready because I saw what she did on business X, Y, and Z. And then in private, they can say to me, Tiffany, the organization is preparing you for this role. I think you might want to go get this experience or do X, Y, and Z to get prepared for it. But the relationship is all about them helping propel me into the organization. And it's not a secret that that's the relationship, right? They understand their role and I understand their role as a sponsee.
So that was, so in the course of this conversation now, we've talked about numerous different types of support, and I'm in my mind drawing kind of a picture of a web because you talked about when you were being recruited to an organization, you met with every single Black leader over a certain level before even joining the company. Then you also talked about employee resource networks, different kind of affinity groups within an organization. That's another way of supporting people in an organization. Then you talked about specific roles, a sponsor and a mentor. What else? I mean, that's amazing, first of all, to think about all those different levels, but also, does it feel kind of daunting from an organizational perspective? Maybe Ron, you can answer this one, about thinking of how do you set up that framework, and are there other things that I missed in that you would want to call out in a structure to support employees?
I mean, it felt pretty comprehensive. I guess the only thing I would add is there's just the normal hierarchy, right? I mean, again, we're talking about organizations of a certain size and a certain kind of scale. I mean, for folks in the room who are in a smaller sort of smaller kind of organization where it's feels a little bit more informal, not the need to have quite as many sort of as much of a sort of org chart. I think a lot of these things still apply, even if they sound like they're super formal. So yeah, I thought Tiffany was pretty comprehensive, and I guess the only thing I'll add is just you need the day-to-day folks who aren't in the ERN and aren't the mentee and aren't the sponsor. They need to be aligned, moving in the same direction. You know, the only thing I want to add to that question about is it more than inclusion? I'd say again, and I was thinking again, you know, because my dad was a small businessman, and I worked for his firms for a long time growing up. And I think he would hear this conversation and say, I got 25 people, I know them all, I've hired them all, this stuff sounds really kind of hierarchical to me. I think that's, I used to tell him, well, you don't quite know them the way you think you know them. You know, you're not down there with them, I'm there with them when you're not around, and, I hear a slightly different story. So I do feel like the basic idea that you want to constantly be collecting data, and that doesn't have to be like survey data or anything even formal, but you want to constantly be hearing what's going on and then adapting. I think that was also a theme that Tiffany said, that you got to make sure you know what's going on. If you wait until everyone leaves, I mean, that's just too late. Now, it's not too late to do a better job next time, but that's just a lot of work to sort of dig yourself out of a hole.
So, yeah, go ahead, Tiffany.
I would just say to put a point on this one, what I'm describing is a community of support, and your organization, no matter the size, can think about designing a community of support for employees in the best way. Whether you're a small business that's got 20 employees, or if you're leading a large enterprise, but folks that work for you are whole humans, right? Like, they are whole people that want to feel supported. They spend a lot of time at work, right? We spend more time at work than anywhere in this country. And so that environment, no matter how casual or how formalized that environment may be, it should feel supportive. And so there are a number of things, hopefully from today, that you can either borrow and apply, no matter the size of your organization, to help employees feel a little more welcome.
So, Ron, Tiffany, you can keep the mic. Ron started to raise the question of metrics, or how do you measure success? And can you talk a little bit about examples that you've seen for organizations that are trying to measure their success around diversity and equity and inclusion?
Yes. We often say, what gets measured gets done. So the first thing is, if your organization has a priority around diversity, equity, and inclusion, to identify the metrics that are relevant to your business, and start by stating what the metrics are. As it relates to in the area of hiring, the certain metrics I've seen are one, keeping an eye on overall representation, right? Like, what is the makeup of the pie of my employees look like? So that's kind of the big, eye on the horizon. And some organizations have goals related to representation. Some organizations have said, my representation should reflect the region in which I'm situated. So, for example, if if we're in Minnesota, the population in Minnesota, the Black population in Minnesota is about 7.5%, right? You might think that your organization's makeup should mirror where you are, the population's region, or the region's population. Some of the other metrics are time to promotion. So thinking about, are employees of different growing in their careers at the same rate as their colleagues. Turnover, who's leaving, who's quitting, and what does that look like? Are people of color leaving me more than others? That may start to signal that you have some challenges in the culture or challenges in inclusion, especially if your hiring numbers look okay. Some organizations that I've worked with have strong hiring numbers, so they can attract diverse employees, and they really start to struggle around year 3, year 4, right? So an employee is a little bit past early career, they probably have learned a little bit more about the organization or the sector, and now they're starting to either start to itch for promotion or itch for a new assignment. There's some sort of transition phase that they're in, and if they are not experiencing that community of support that we talked about, often they will leave the organization. And if you go back to what I was saying earlier, in this region in particular, sometimes that person may leave the region entirely. So, thinking about representation, certainly in the big picture, but hiring, time to promotion, turnover, those are some of the other metrics I've seen organizations adopt.
Right.
The only thing I want to add is, I think one thing we've struggled with when we tried doing more of this kind of work was, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, right? So we've got a relatively decentralized organization, and I would ask people, hey, what are you doing in your area as we're trying to advance this goal? And they'd say, well, we're all getting together to watch a TED Talk. I said, okay, well, what is it why? I mean, tell me what it is you want to achieve. I'm not against watching a TED Talk. I mean, I'm sure many of them are great. But what is it that you think is going to happen? Well, X, Y, and Z. And I'm talking to people who otherwise, when I ask them a question, hey, what are you trying to accomplish with this? Oh, we're going to get shrinkage down by this. We're going to get this many things processed per minute. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to know how many people it is. And even things that are harder to measure. Well, we'll do surveys and we'll figure out if there's a difference. When I ask those questions around here, sort of like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not quite sure. I think the thing that Tiffany said that I'm hoping we're trying to do as much as we can, this is not a separate program. It's not a separate way of thinking about the organization. The things that you do and are held accountable for in every other part of the organization should be applied here. So since I know you, person X, that I'm talking to, you're never having a project without a clear objective. You're great at that. But here, when I asked you what was going on, you said you were sort of unclear. Well, then you're not going to have any good metrics. I mean, how can you possibly have a decent metric when you don't even know what it is you were trying to get done? So again, my point isn't that people are bad, people are trying to subvert this. My point is it's hard, and it's a different conversation for folks, and just need to be around and support them, but ask the questions that they normally ask you. That's been my experience. Okay, what would you ask me if I worked for you in this case? Oh, I'd ask you all these things. Okay, great. That's what we're going to go do. That's what you're going to go do. So I think that's the key part.
So this has been really great. I think we have time for one final question, and I just want to summarize really kind of briefly that we heard a lot in this conversation about how do we create sustainable practices, how do we ultimately align and fully integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into our business objectives and create incentives for hiring managers and for other folks to really align with that to make better organizations, to either make better hiring decisions or ultimately have our organizations reflect our customers, the communities that we serve. And so for both of you, in our final minute and a half here, do you have a parting piece of advice for folks thinking about these issues? We've talked about a lot already, but I just want to give you the opportunity to say one final thing.
The final thing I'll say, I mean, I've talked a lot about, I think you summarized kind of my take on it, but let's say you're an organization and you've decided, hey, my idea, what I'm trying to achieve in my part of the world is revolution, right? I want to completely change things up, et cetera. That's your choice, right? Your choice is what it is that you want to achieve. I guess my final comment would be, you're going to achieve that, whatever that is, whether it's processing something or your earnings per share, or you're a social justice nonprofit and you want to make the world totally different. Whatever that thing is, my strong view is that you're going to achieve that thing better if you have better processes in place, which are going to show up by having more diversity, more inclusion, being a more equitable place. Those things are going to happen. Those things are going to happen, is my experience.
I'm going to end with how I started this, and my piece of advice is to start. Do something. this is hard work. And it is not at all lost on me that it is daunting to talk about race, talk about dismantling racism, advancing racial equity. It's hard and it's uncomfortable, but I guarantee you, we will not get anywhere if you do nothing. And recognize that there will be missteps along the way, but your responsibility as a leader is just to do something. Work with smart people that can help you learn and teach you on the journey, but you just gotta take the first step.
Thank you, and please join me in thanking our panelists. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. I think you deserve a raise, but thank you for being here and doing this deep dive. I think I speak for everyone when I say we could be here for another 2 hours with you. It's just fascinating, and your individual takes are equally compelling. So thank you so much for giving us your time today and joining us. Rotary is a global network of 1.3 million neighbors, friends, leaders, and problem solvers who see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. From literacy and peace to water and health, Rotarians are always working to better our world, and we stay committed to the end. In honor of your presentation today, we'll make a donation to the Northside Boxing Club, a local nonprofit offering positive connections with youth every evening in the gym, providing boxing classes, tutoring help, and a nutritious meal from a local restaurant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want to sit down, okay. Can you stay up? There's more cookies. Thank you very much. You guys were wonderful. So Ron, you brought up metrics. One of the things is being president of a Rotary Club, your metrics are based on your fundraiser, we just did that, membership, we just did that, and also meetings. So today I think we got a hat trick. So it's fantastic. Great meeting. Sylvester, Josh, and Jennifer, that was fantastic, and really appreciate all your thoughtful responses. I've got a ton of notes here. Being a guy who grew up in Edina from a family of 5 generations of Irish marrying Irish, and growing up in a community where it's not all that diverse, this has been, the past 10 years have been just wonderful to get to know. So, Opportunity Alley. We have got opportunities, we've got fireside chats coming up in October, Hullabaloo, the trick or treat on October 27th. Camp E, we are looking for mentors and counselors. So please sign up. I think we still have the board in the back. Sam, you still got the board open? I do. All right. Make sure you sign up. Involve Minnesota, Feed the Homeless on November 12th. Make sure you sign up for that. Veep Bag Pack on November 16th. And of course, Thanksgiving baskets. Upcoming events, we have on the 13th, we have Dr. James Campbell with MNGI Digestive Health, which will be great. Then on the 20th, we have District Governor Lloyd Campbell. That'll be great. That'll be a 12:45 start. 11:45, good call. Nice catch, thanks. And we ran through all of the others. So I'd like to thank you all, and a special thanks to our guests and visiting Rotarians. We hope the meeting was meaningful. So go forth with a smile on your face, love in your hearts, people of action. Continue to do good work in our communities and the world. Meeting adjourned.